Sometime around dusk, you stop watching, you close the blinds, or you walk away from the window, or you just go to bed. And the birds you watched all day at the feeder, the ones you know by sight now, the regulars, they go somewhere every single evening, and every single morning they come back. You have never once seen where they go? Think about that. You can probably name half the birds in your yard, the chickadees, the cardinals, the little gang of house finches that fights over the feeder. You know their habits in daylight down to the minute, but the moment the light drops below a certain point, all of them vanish into a part of their lives you have never witnessed and probably never thought to ask about. Where does a chickadee sleep? When the temperature drops to 10 degrees on a January night, where exactly is that 2/3 of an ounce bird, and how is it still alive in the morning? What is happening in the dark over your roof while you sleep that involves more birds than you see in your yard all week? The nightlife of the birds around you is stranger and more dangerous than the daytime version you know, and it starts the second you stop looking. Here's the thing most people never connect. The birds at your feeder are not winding down at the end of the day. In the last hour of light, they are working harder than at any other point in the day, and they're doing it for a reason that comes down to survival math. A small songbird burns through its fat reserves overnight just staying warm. A chickadee can lose up to 10% of its entire body weight in a single cold night, purely to keep its body temperature up while it sleeps. If it goes into the night without enough fat, it doesn't wake up. So the last hour before dark is the most important feeding window of the bird's entire day. It is loading fuel for a night that might kill it. That frantic activity you sometimes notice at the feeder right before dusk isn't your imagination. It's a bird racing a deadline. This channel is about the parts of birds' lives that happen right next to you and stay invisible. If that's what you're here for, subscribe before you go further, because once you know where your birds spend the night, you won't be able to look at your yard at dusk the same way again. There's a deeper layer to this, and it's one of the more elegant findings in bird research. You'd assume a small bird would want to be as fat as possible all the time, as insurance. More fat means more protection against a cold night. But birds don't do that. And for decades, that puzzled researchers. A series of studies in the 1990s, led in large part by the behavioral ecologist Alasdair Houston and his colleagues working on small birds like great tits and juncos, worked out why fat is a trade-off. Carrying extra fat keeps you warm, but it also makes you heavier. A heavier bird is a slower bird. It takes off later. It climbs slower. It maneuvers worse. And the thing trying to eat a small bird, a hawk or a falcon, succeeds or fails based on fractions of a second and small differences in agility. So the bird is solving an equation every single day without knowing it's doing math. Stay too lean and you risk freezing overnight. Get too fat and you risk getting caught by a predator during the day. The solution that evolved is precise. Birds stay relatively lean through the middle of the day when predators are most active, keeping themselves fast and agile. Then, in the last hour before dark, when the danger of being hunted drops, they deliberately gorge and put on the fat they'll burn overnight. The bird is carrying exactly as much fuel as it needs, and not 1 gram more. Time to the light. That dusk feeding frenzy is the bird collecting the night's fuel at the last safe moment. It's a daily gamble with the bird's own body weight as the stake. So the bird has its fuel. The light is almost gone. Now it has to disappear. And where it goes is something almost no one ever sees. Different birds solve the night in completely different ways. The cavity nesters, the chickadees, titmice, nuthatches, and woodpeckers look for an enclosed space, a hole in a tree, an old woodpecker excavation, a gap behind bark, sometimes a birdhouse you put up months ago and assumed was empty. Inside that cavity, sheltered from wind and hidden from most predators, the bird fluffs its feathers into a thick insulating layer and drops its body into a kind of energy-saving mode. Some of them do something remarkable in the cold. On the most brutal nights, chickadees can enter a state of regulated hypothermia. They deliberately let their body temperature fall by 10 or 15 degrees below their daytime normal, slowing their metabolism and burning far less fuel to make it to dawn. They are essentially powering themselves down to survive the dark, then bringing themselves back up at first light. Other birds pack together for warmth. There are records of cavity roosting birds cramming themselves into a single tree hole or a single nest box in startling numbers, a dozen or more birds layered inside one cavity, sharing body heat through the worst of the cold. The bird that wouldn't share a feeder with another of its kind in daylight will spend the night pressed against 10 of them in the dark. The birds that don't use cavities, like cardinals, sparrows, and finches, go deep into the densest cover they can find. Thick evergreens, tangled shrubs, dense brush. They pick a spot sheltered from wind, often on the side of the cover away from the prevailing weather, and they go still and silent. This is part of why a dense conifer or an untrimmed thicket in your yard matters more than people realize. It's not just cover during the day, it's a dormitory. Then, once the day birds have tucked themselves away, an entirely different set of birds takes over the dark. Most people have no idea that there's a night shift of birds at all. But your yard, after the chickadees have gone to roost, may belong to birds you have genuinely never seen in your life. The owls come first and most reliably. An eastern screech owl small enough to fit in your two hands can be hunting from a low perch in your yard, taking mice, large insects, and yes, sometimes the very songbirds sleeping in the cover nearby. A great horned owl can be sitting on a branch over your roof, listening with hearing so precise it can locate a mouse moving under leaf litter in total darkness. You will almost never know either of them was there. In many regions, there are stranger night birds passing through. Nightjars, like the whippoorwill, hunting moths on the wing in near total darkness. Woodcocks probing soft ground for worms at dusk. These are birds that share your neighborhood and operate entirely in the hours you're not watching. And then there's the thing happening overhead that almost nobody knows about. Most songbirds migrate at night. The warblers, the thrushes, the sparrows, the orioles, the vast majority of small migrating songbirds in North America do their traveling in darkness. They wait for night, lift off, and fly for hours in the dark, navigating by the stars and the Earth's magnetic field, cooled by the night air and hidden from daytime hawks. On a good migration night in spring or fall, hundreds of millions of birds are in the air over the continent, and a steady stream of them is passing directly over your dark, quiet yard, thousands of feet up while you sleep. You can't see them, but you can hear them. If you know to listen. As they fly, many of them give short, faint contact calls, single high chips and lists that keep the flock loosely connected in the dark. Birders call these nocturnal flight calls. On a big migration night, if you stand in your yard and just listen to the sky, you can hear the calls of birds passing overhead that you will never see, raining down faintly out of the dark. The yard you think is empty at night is, on the right nights of the year, underneath a river of birds. If your idea of your own yard is quietly changing right now, tell me in the comments where you live roughly and whether you've ever heard birds calling overhead at night without knowing what they were. That was almost certainly migration. I read all of them. For most of history, none of this was knowable because the moment you go out at night with a light to look, you change everything the birds are doing. The watching ruins the thing you're trying to watch. What cracked it open is technology that doesn't need a human standing there. Radar was the first surprise. Starting in the mid-20th century, meteorologists kept seeing strange blooms on their weather radar at night, expanding clouds that weren't rain. They turned out to be migrating birds, lifting off en masse after dark. Today, researchers use that same radar to measure migration, and on peak nights, the radar lights up across whole regions with the mass of birds aloft. For the night calls, cheap microphones left running overnight do the work no human could. Point a recorder at the sky during migration season and let it run, and in the morning the recording is full of flight calls from birds that passed over in the dark, each species with its own signature note. People are mapping migration over their own houses this way, one night of audio at a time. And for the roosting birds, a small camera near a nest box or a cavity reveals the secret sleepers, the chickadees filing in at dusk. The dozen birds packed into one hole. Take the human out of the picture, let a quiet machine watch instead, and the nightlife of your birds finally shows itself. So tonight, when the light goes and your feeder empties out, you'll know it isn't empty because the day is over. It's empty because every bird out there is in the middle of the hardest part of its day. The chickadee is wedged into a tree cavity, powered down into the cold. burning the fat it gorged on at your feeder an hour ago, trying to make it to a light it can't yet see. The cardinal is buried deep in the conifer, still and silent against the wind. The screech owl is awake and hunting them, and thousands of feet up on the right night, an invisible flood of warblers and thrushes is pouring across the sky over your roof, calling softly to each other in the dark, gone again by morning. None of it stops because you stopped watching. It was always going to happen whether you saw it or not. You just spent your whole life only ever seeing the easy half, the daylight half, and assuming that was the whole story. Here's something to actually try. On the next clear night in spring or fall, step outside, stand still, and then just listen to the sky for a few minutes. If you hear faint little chips drifting down out of the dark, that's migration happening right over you. Tell me in the comments if you hear it, and subscribe because the next video is about the one thing your birds do every morning before sunrise that has a stranger purpose than anyone assumes. See you there.